for just a minute, and then we'll kick it back over to you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, so today, whoops, stop that. There we go. Okay. So today, Jason Swett's going to be joining us to talk about how to do test-driven development with help of ChatGPT. I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's going to be very interesting. But just give you an idea of what's coming up. Next week, we've got Mastering Team Reflection, the art of reliable retrospective. Those people are all sitting there retrospecting on something. The week after that, we've got Ryan Lata joining us. He's going to be talking about work in progress or whip into shape, kind of about managing the amount of things you're doing at one time. So that's going to be pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to that. And then I think it's the second week after that, Nayan Hajarwala is going to be joining us to talk about embracing these three fearsome words, testing in production. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. I've worked with Nathan a lot on other previous projects, and he's usually got pretty interesting things to say. I'll also mention I've sent out a link to people on email. If you're interested in getting together to talk about Agile for 30 minutes, this link will get you there. I will throw it in the chat in just a second, but that should be in your email. If you haven't seen it, it might have gotten put into spam, but if there's anything you want to talk about related to Agile, I'd love to chat with you. And there's some quite a few slots in the next 2 weeks open if anybody wants to do that. So that being said, so I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and Jason, you've got the floor. Excited to see this.
All right. Thanks everybody for
One
coming.
thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, interrupt myself one more time here. Or actually, I didn't interrupt myself. I interrupt Jason. But in the sidebar, there should be a Slido thing. So if you think of questions, Jason will have this up on another monitor. If you think of questions that you want to ask, put them in there and vote other questions up and down. That way he can try to make sure he addresses those, or particularly addressing the ones that are more popular. I'll put a link in the chat as well if it doesn't pop up for you. But that's a way to ask questions as we're going. So, okay, turn it over to you for real now.
Okay. I'm Jason Swett. Thanks everybody for being here. I am a podcaster, speaker, consultant, writer. Currently, I'm writing a book called The AI Advantage, which is about how to use AI to help with your programming work. And part of the reason I'm writing this book is because I've been using ChatGPT ever since ChatGPT 4 came out. It's become basically a daily part of my workflow, and I just wanted to share the techniques that I've found useful. And I'm going to share some of those techniques today as well. And I'll share this link afterward too, but you can find everything I do if you go to codewithjason.com. That's where you can find my podcast, my writings, just everything. So I want to start off with a question, and I want you guys to type your answer to the question in the chat here, if you don't mind. And the question for you is, when you first encountered ChatGPT and you first started to think about ChatGPT as it relates to programming, what use case was the main use case that you thought of when you saw it? And that's I'm not looking for a profound answer. It might be just a one-word answer when you first saw ChatGPT. What was your thought? And then follow-up question to that is, when you started to use ChatGPT for programming, were there any ways in which it fell short of your expectations, or it just didn't work out how you hoped? Okay, and I'm reading some of the answers here. Technical documentation, rubber ducking, cleaning up after others who are uncritically using ChatGPT in deployed code. That's great, and that's actually something we're going to talk about today. Help with writing a test refactoring exercises, edge cases testing, just testing in general. Okay. And if more answers come in, I'll kind of try to keep an eye on that. But that gives us a good starting point. I'm surprised nobody said what the what I thought the most obvious case was, which is writing code. In my experience, most of the programmers who encounter ChatGPT the first thing they think of is, I'm going to use this to help me write code. And then a lot of people are disappointed or they're critical of ChatGPT and other similar tools because it doesn't always write very good code. And this is something that I wanted to address in my book and in talks like this, because I think that belies kind of well, I don't know if I'd call it a misconception or misunderstanding, but I feel like it's, if you're using ChatGPT to write application code, you're maybe missing out on the best uses of it. And I think maybe today we have a smarter crowd than usual, because I saw, not smarter crowd than usual here, smarter crowd than people in other places. Um, I saw a number of people saying testing was one of the things that they imagined using ChatGPT for. So somebody said, they thought of using ChatGPT to clean up after other people. I can't find the comment anymore, but to clean up after other people who just kind of copy pasted code from ChatGPT into their application. And just because, okay, I'll say this. Writing fresh code in a greenfield environment is not the hard part of programming. And it's also not like mainly what a job as a programmer consists of. Like, I can't remember the last time I wrote greenfield code for an actual production project. Usually we're extending and modifying existing systems. And so I've seen these demos where people will give a prompt to ChatGPT and say, write me an entire game that does such and such. And then ChatGPT goes to work and it writes all this code. And then the game comes up and the game works perfectly. And it's truly impressive. But that's the implication seems to be that we can do our work this way. And I think that's not realistic at all, because sure, you can have ChatGPT write this entire program, but what happens when you need to make a change to it? Then maybe you can make your change, but then it's up to you to somehow like manually regression test everything. And that's no good. Like, just because we have this thing that can write code for us doesn't mean that all the benefits of having tests go away. And it doesn't mean that it's somehow just okay to write code without tests and we don't suffer any negative consequences of that. I would never hire a contractor and have that person just write me a bunch of untested code and then copy paste it and put it in my code base and deploy it. So why would we do that with a tool if we would never do that with a human? So that's an aspect that I think a lot of people maybe could benefit from some recalibration in how they approach tools like ChatGPT. That does not mean, however, that ChatGPT isn't useful for writing code. It just means maybe we want to do it in a certain way. So I found a certain workflow that I really like a lot, which is I ask ChatGPT not to write some code, but I ask it first to write a test. And then the really interesting part is it can write a test, then I can run that test, then I can feed back the failure message to ChatGPT. ChatGPT can write the code to make the failure message go away. I'll run the test again, give the output back to GPT, and this loop just continues. And I am just I'm the maestro of this whole thing. I hardly have to do any actual work. Well, a lot of the time I hardly have to do any work. There comes times when you have to take back control and do fine-grained work because ChatGPT isn't smart enough or it doesn't understand your desires or whatever. But a lot of the time you can just say, here are my requirements, write tests for these requirements, and then write the code to make these tests pass. So what I wanted to do for you today is show you a little demo of this workflow. And before I do, another question for the chat here. Has anybody themselves done a similar workflow to what I just described already? Um, Chris Luther says, so instead of TDD, it's ChatGPT DD. I actually have a GitHub repo called ChatGPT DD that kind of facilitates some of this stuff. So yeah, you're exactly right. Okay, I am going to share my screen. Okay. And I think I hopefully have the font size good here, but let me know anybody if it's not legible for people. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is give ChatGPT what some people call a system message, which is kind of a meta prompt. It's a prompt that says, here's how we're going to work in general in this session. And I'm actually going to refer to my own in progress book here and get the prompt from here. So the first thing I'm going to say is this. I want to write a program that gives me factors for numbers. Here are some examples of inputs and outputs. Okay, so just so you guys understand the intent here, you can probably infer just from these examples, but if you give it the number 8, it gives you 2 sets of factors. Of course, 1 and 8 make 8, and 2 and 4 make 8 as well. And then here are some other examples of the inputs we might give and the correct outputs that correspond to those inputs. And here is where we give it the operating instructions. So first, a key thing here is we're telling ChatGPT that we want to build this program in a TDD style. ChatGPT is smart enough to know what that means. And we're specifically mentioning we want to use Python. That's just an arbitrary choice. And I'm telling it the exact TDD workflow that we want to use. So first, I want ChatGPT to ask me for a test case. And then the next step is I give the test case and ChatGPT writes it and I run it. And then next I give the output. And of course, if the test passes, then we're done and we just go to the next one. If the test fails, then I want just enough code to make the failure message go away. And I found that this is a nuance that ChatGPT had a little bit of trouble understanding. So I had to be very forceful and explicit. I said, to be clear, I don't want enough code to necessarily make the test pass. I just want enough code to make the failure message go away. Okay. And then there's a couple more things I include in this initial prompt. So ChatGPT has a tendency to make assumptions. And its assumptions don't always match up with what I want. So I say, if I ever give anything that's unclear, ambiguous, don't make assumptions. Instead, ask me clarifying questions. And that's one of the top techniques that I've discovered with ChatGPT is with every prompt, give it an instruction like this. Tell it not to make assumptions and instead ask you questions. If you do some experiments where you give it the same prompt with and without that extra instruction, you'll notice a night and day difference between what you get back and the ultimate outcome that you get. Okay, and then finally, we're giving it the first test case. When we're given the number 7, return 1 and 7. So let's let ChatGPT go to work on this. Okay, so what I got back was a test case and then the application code mixed into the same file. Arguably, there could be an argument to be made that it shouldn't even have included this, but I'm fine with that. Create a file called, well, first let me do okay, so we'll call it, I don't know, test.py. We can rename that later. Okay, and then I'm gonna run this. And I'm actually not a Python guy, so I don't remember how to do this. So I'm gonna say, how do I run it? Oh wait, maybe I just do this. Yeah, I think that's how you do it. Yeah. Okay, so never mind about this ChatGPT. Yeah, it said Python and then the file name. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy the failure message like I told ChatGPT I was going to do, and here it is. Okay, and to make this failure message go away, it's absolutely right. One option we have is just to hard code an answer that makes this particular test pass. That's a valid way to do it, in my opinion. Okay, so now when we run that, we get no failure. And rather than saying that with words, I'm just going to show ChatGPT what happened. Okay, so it correctly inferred that the test passed, and it says, now let's give another test case. How about, okay, what did we just do? We said when we give it 7, we get 1 and 7. Okay. How about we say when we give it 8, it gives us 1, 8, and 2, 4. And notice how I'm being very terse. I'm not including English language here. I'm giving it the bare minimum that I think it needs in order to know what I'm talking about. And usually it's smart enough to figure it out. Okay, so it's giving us a second test case here. So I will run that. We get no error, which is surprising. Oh, interesting. It's only running this one. Okay, so that's actually weird to me that it does it that way. I'm going to make it so it runs all the tests. Change this test so it runs all the tests instead of just the one for 7. No, this can't be right. I don't remember ever having to do this before. So I'm going to tell that to ChatGPT. Okay. Yeah, and this is another kind of funny thing about ChatGPT is sometimes it'll give you a low quality answer and you can just say, "No, give me a better answer," and it will. Okay. So this might be a shortcoming in my personal knowledge at this point because this is no good. There's definitely a better way to achieve this. So let me try to open an older project and grab the test file. And if anybody has a clue for me in the chat, feel free to help me out. I don't know how to get back to the chat though.
I think this proves that ChatGPT knows if you're doing a live demo or not.
Ah,
And I give you lower quality answers just to trip you up a little bit.
exactly. Okay. Oh, I remember now where there's a project that I can refer to. Yes.
But I think this does make for an interesting demo because you're demoing a language that isn't like the main language you use, right?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and ChatGPT, people sometimes say like, well, won't ChatGPT make us atrophy as developers because it'll do all the thinking for us and we won't have to do that thinking anymore, so we'll forget how to think. Maybe in some ways, but also I think ChatGPT will actually help us learn more and faster. Like I would not have been able to learn so much Python as fast as I did if it had not been for ChatGPT. Okay, so here's my test for this other project. Okay, I'm just going to say this. Here's a test file from another project of mine. Notice how I don't have to have any loops. Your answer was more complicated than it needed to be. Give me a better answer. Oh, okay. Okay, I don't want to do all this. But I'm actually just remembering that in my book, I had a test file that looked like this. So let's do it that way. What if we do it like this? Okay. Yeah, so that's another thing about ChatGPT is it's non-deterministic. It won't necessarily do the same things the same way on different sessions. So even though this worked quite smoothly last time I tried it, uh, this time it did it in a subtly different way, which obviously has caused me a little bit of trouble.
Well,
Okay, so
it may be trouble
mhm,
in that it took you a few more steps, but as far as your understanding of how the test frameworks work in Python goes, you probably know more now than if it had of actually given it to you the exact same way again.
that's a really good point. Okay, so it looks like, okay, maybe I just copied this wholesale. Okay, and now I get two errors. I get one error related to 1.7 and another error relating to 1.824. And that's actually a little bit surprising because we'd already taken, oh, it's putting back pass. Okay. Okay. Well, anyway, I'm going to give it this failure message and see what it does with that. Okay. Whoops. And I admire the fact that it went one small step instead of making both these tests pass at once. It's going one test at a time. Okay. That makes one of the failures go away. Now let's see what happens when we give it this other failure. And this workflow is not that smooth. It maybe feels a little primitive, um, but one can imagine a future where a lot of this stuff is more automated. We don't have to tab between the terminal and the browser and stuff like that. And we can just stay in the terminal the whole time. I think that's maybe a future we're headed toward. Okay, so it's giving this very silly implementation where the factors are just hard coded. Okay. So I will tell ChatGPT about that. But the solution is kind of dumb because it won't work for other numbers. The other nice thing about this is you don't have to worry about being tactful. Okay, so now we make kind of a big jump and it writes all this code for us. So let's see what happens when we replace this implementation with this new one. Whoops. Okay, everything still passes. But unfortunately, I don't understand this code. Like what's the n to the power of half all about? And why 1, why plus 1? What's all this stuff about? I want to make the code easier to understand. So we're kind of shifting a little bit. Like up to now, we were only worried about making things work. And now I'm concerned with making things a little bit easier to understand. So I'll say, I don't immediately understand what all those numbers are. Refactor this code in the following way. Use OOP. Break the code into a number of smaller, easier to understand methods. I do not have high hopes that it'll give me something I'm happy with, but let's see. One advantage that humans have over AI is that we're stupid. And because we're stupid, it's easy for us to know the limits of what a human can understand. It's fine for a computer to write code like this because it has no cognitive limit really. Whereas for a human, I look at this and I'm like, I can't understand this, but it's hard for an AI to understand what's hard to understand. Okay, so it gives us this code, which we can't see all at one time, but I think this is not great. It calls the class factorizer, which isn't very meaningful. Has this isFactor method, which is like, okay, maybe okay, but compute factors, that's not all that meaningful either. Like, isn't this whole thing about computing factors? So I'm going to tell it to try again. I think factorizer is a poor abstraction. It doesn't have much meaning. Give me a few ideas for a better last name. And we're now getting into territory where this might be a better job for me than the computer. Yeah, I don't think any of these are actually all that good. So let's see if we can think of something better.
So one of the things, let me read a couple things from the chat because I think it's off your screen now.
Yeah.
Somebody actually said, would it be reasonable to ask it to explain the code to you?
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's see what happens when we do that. Explain this code to me. Pretend I'm stupid. And I think that actually does help. That wasn't just for laughs. I really want it to dumb it down as much as it can. Okay, so we'll let this do its thing. And in the meantime, what could be a better abstraction here? What are we actually doing? We're giving it a number and we want back the factors that go into it. How about this? Factorable number. So 7 is a factorable number, 8 is a factorable number, and then it gives us back some sets of factors. So I will make that suggestion to it in just a moment.
Let me run through
Okay.
some of the other questions people had that might be.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, Terrence asked, so if you copy the same question multiple times, you get different answers. I think that is what you're saying is the case, right?
Yeah, or to be more precise, you don't necessarily always get the same answer.
Okay. Also, Robert asked, can you also adjust ChatGPT's temperature from the web interface, or is it doing that behind the scenes when you say no, try again?
I don't think there's a way to, in fact, I'm quite certain there's no way to adjust the temperature via the chat. You can do that via the API, I believe, but the chat has very limited settings.
Okay. And another comment that somebody thought the divisor list wasn't that bad of a suggestion for the class name.
Hmm.
And then there also was a question about where's your book? Is it on LeanPub? Is that something we can give people a link to, or where it's going to be?
Sadly, there's no link yet, but it'll be in Manning's early access program sometime in the not too distant future.
Cool.
Okay. So my fear was that ChatGPT would give us an overly literal description of what this code does at too low of a level of abstraction. And it seems like maybe that's kind of what it's doing. Okay. Into the 1/2, that calculates the square root. Okay. Calculates the square root to an integer. But it's like, why are we doing the square root in the first place? It doesn't explain that. Oh, okay. It does explain that. After the square root, we won't find any new pairs of factors. Okay. Okay. Well, let's do this. Let's say, give me the code inside of a class called factorable number. I'll just say that for now. Okay, sure, but it took my instruction pretty literally. It just plopped that code into a method, and that's the one method. This range, it feels like this range could maybe be in a method. And you know what? This is like a time when it's appropriate to just like take control back and realize that it's actually easier now just to be in charge ourselves rather than going through ChatGPT. So there are times when ChatGPT saves us mental effort, and there are times when ChatGPT is just an unhelpful middleman, and it's better to cut out the middleman and decide that you can do a better job than it can, which I think is the case from here on out with the refactoring. So we're iterating over the range of numbers that it makes sense to iterate over. And then for each one of those, we're seeing if we get, we're seeing if there's a remainder when we divide it. So can we abstract this? Can we think of like a label to put on this range of numbers? If anybody wants to make a suggestion, I'm open to it. This is, it's hard to think of a name for this. It's like the factors that we want to test. Oh, it's the candidates. It's the candidate numbers. I don't know. Maybe we'll come up with a better name in a second, but I'm going to put candidate numbers. Okay. And we'll say return this range. Okay. For I in candidate numbers. Yes. Okay, we'll see if the tests still pass. Nope, I made a mistake. Get factors is not defined. Oh yeah, I put it in a class. Okay. And here I am going to go back to ChatGPT and say, fix these tests now that I'm using a class. And again, hopefully in the future, I can just stay inside of Vim here and give a, I can say GPT fix this, fix these tests, blah, 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 and it'll just be done right here. But in these early primitive times, we have to tab between this and the browser. Okay, so I'm going to blow this away. I'm going to replace it with this new version and see if my tests still pass. Okay, now they do pass. All right, so maybe this is a slight improvement. And then I is not a very meaningful name. I can say for candidate number in candidate numbers. Okay. Oh yeah, somebody commented that Copilot is integrated into a lot of IDEs. Can Copilot do something like that? Like if I have a file and I want to just say like globally change various parts of this file in a certain way, can Copilot do that? Name I is not defined. Okay, so apparently I missed a case. Oh, there it is. Okay, apparently I missed another case. Yes, okay. Okay. And then one more thing I'll do. In is also not a very meaningful name, so I'll call it value instead. Self.value equals value. Okay, self.value. Let's see if I, oh no, there was one more case of it here. Okay. Still passes. Whoops. Okay. So maybe we could go further with this. I don't know. But the point here is that at some point, I think it usually makes sense to take the baton from GPT and say, okay, thanks GPT for getting me something that works and satisfies the test. Now I, the human, am going to do what, according to my human judgment, makes this code easier for a human to understand. Because I think that's still a job that humans are uniquely better at least for now. Maybe that'll change in the future. I have a hunch that if that changes, it'll change slowly and it'll be in the more distant future, because that's, again, we have the benefit of knowing our own cognitive limitations. Okay, so that is what I wanted to show you. Now we could open it up for some Q&A.
So we've got, if you open the Slido thing, I can just read them to you. Well, we've got a couple questions here. One was from Robert asking, are you concerned about intellectual property sensitivity or privacy when using Chat, GPT, or Copilot?
Good question. That's not something I think about a lot. I actually don't use Copilot because I tried it for a while and I found that it was, well, it wasn't that helpful. It solved a problem that I don't really have because like typing is not the bottleneck for me. And so I don't use it. So ChatGPT, the way I use that is I just put my prompts into the browser. And so I have I have total control over what I give it and what I don't give it. So obviously I'm never giving it things like API keys and such. Um, some people say don't paste your code into ChatGPT, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, think about this: even if somebody got a hold of your entire GitHub repo, like, what are they going to do with that? What is the security concern or business concern? Um, So that's one question, and they're not going to get your entire GitHub repo. They're just going to get whatever fragments you may have pasted into ChatGPT. And if somebody gets like 12 files that you happen to paste into ChatGPT, what are they going to do with that? And by the time they get it, it's probably going to be like not relevant anyway. They can't plug it into anything, and yeah, I think that is just not a very valid concern.
Well, and I think differentiating between what you're describing as what you see the risk being versus if you're in a place where you could get fired for doing something with the information and pasting it somewhere, don't don't do that.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, that's my
Um,
opinion for my own code. For somebody else's code, obviously that's not up to me to decide.
what somebody pointed out said, but even a silly answer can break the ice to finding a solution. Brigham mentioned that, which I thought was an interesting observation.
Yeah, yeah, something that I like to remind people of is that like a correct useful answer, sorry, a correct answer to a question is not the only kind of answer that's useful. Like sometimes I'm like bantering with a human coworker or something like that. And I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And they're like, well, maybe we should do that. And I'm like, no, that's a terrible idea. But that makes me think about this. So even if ChatGPT only ever gave like incorrect, useless answers, useless, they still could be useful because it gets you thinking.
I got another, I guess this is more of a comment, but the code it
Mhm.
has suggested is basically textbook factorization code you learn in comp sci courses. I wonder if it's been trained on some Python textbooks, which I think brings up an interesting question. Where, in your experience, where is this stuff coming from? Like, do you ever run into something like, well, that looks like it came from here or anything like that?
Yeah. Never for like a specific source, but in general, specifically with tests. So, there's that saying, "What's popular is not always right," and here's a good example. When ChatGPT writes prose, its prose tends to be quite mediocre, as I'm sure you guys have noticed. And so if you're a below average writer, ChatGPT can bring you up to average level, and that's good. But if you're an above average writer, it'll regress you down to an average writer, and therefore it's not helpful. Because ChatGPT, in my conception of how it probably works, it has intaken all the writing in the world or whatever, um, and it basically averages it out. It's not making a distinction between the greatest writing of all time. It's not making a distinction between Shakespeare and some person's blog. It just mushes it all together and then gives you back a result that's the average quality of everything it's ever gotten. So the reason I say that is when I ask ChatGPT to write me tests, it will write me mediocre tests, tests that test implementation rather than behavior, or tests that are just pointless or meaningless or whatever. And so even though it can do those things, it's still up to me as a trained, knowledgeable programmer to tell it exactly what kind of test I want it to write. So I think ChatGPT can be a great tool that gives leverage to developers who are already skilled, but it can't be a replacement for skill. You can't be somebody who doesn't know how to write tests and say, ChatGPT, write me some tests and then write me the code to make it pass. You'll probably end up with a mess. Um, there are benefits to people who are just starting out. Like if you're a beginner, I think GPT can really lower the bar because you can say, "Give me an illustration for such and such," and then it can maybe teach you. But for writing production code, it will probably allow a lot of people to just create a bigger mess faster. So it's not a replacement for skill. I meandered a little bit, but the answer is yes, kind of. I can see where it's getting its content from.
So another question, Rowan said, have you done this type of code testing with GPT-3? What's the difference between ChatGPT-3 and 4? Are you seeing big difference, small difference? What do you think?
Night and day difference. I've used ChatGPT 3 like twice since 4 came out because the difference is just so extreme. Going back to 3 after having experienced 4 is like so painful because it's just so much worse. Um, if any of you are on 3 right now, like I beg of you, please pay the $20 a month to upgrade to 4. It's way different. And I think a lot of people who are like kind of dismissing GPT or saying it's not ready or anything like that, a lot of those people are on 3 and not 4. Like 4 is so much smarter.
Cool. So let's see in the chat. I see someone saying that it reminds them of some of the conversations in the Willy Wonka movie, which I like. That's great. And then some more discussion about the security issues and stuff with it. Which Ethan, I think you're bringing up some pretty interesting points there, and I guess it may depend on what you're and not from a standpoint of what your corporate governance says you have to do, but I think I'd be pretty comfortable talking to ChatGPT to find a more efficient way to traverse a list or something like that, or tools for that, but a lot less comfortable giving away the keys to the crown of a special algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think ChatGPT can give you like more efficient code, maybe than, but at least me personally, maybe it could give me something more efficient than I could come up with on my own. So I might use it for that. But for anytime I see somebody, not that I've seen a lot of cases of this, but when I see somebody give code to ChatGPT and say, please refactor this, often it just like obfuscates it rather than makes it easier to understand.
Now I'm wanting to give some code to an ask it to obfuscate it and see what I end up getting back.
Ah,
That's a new challenge here. But does
yeah.
anyone else have any other questions for Jason or comments or thoughts? This is pretty interesting. I haven't seen I've seen bits of what you presented us before, Jason, but this is pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks. Um, yeah, if there's no other questions, I'll just mention again the title of my upcoming book is The AI Advantage. And again, that's coming out with Manning, and it should be early 2024 is when that's coming out. And I go over, I'll just mention real quick, um, testing. I'm looking at the chapter headings here. I talk in the book about a lot of people make the mistake of anthropomorphizing AI, which I think leads to a distorted mental model of what it is and stuff like that. And that's kind of a fun topic to discuss. We touch on that in the book a little bit. Using AI to learn new technologies to help plan projects, debugging. I actually think writing, kind of like I said earlier, I think writing application code is one of the more minor use cases for GPT. I think these other ones like planning and writing tests and stuff like that are actually a lot more helpful.
So I see some comments here. Astrid is pointing out that it's quite a bit different than what we did a few weeks ago when my son and I did some pair programming and test-driven development. Although, Astrid, one thing I did notice is I felt a little bit like the Chat GPT there, where I did something and Benjamin was like, "Yeah, that's not going to work." So so maybe there are some things related to it. Let's see if there's somebody was asking if you've ever tried doing anything like this with behavior-driven development, where you're kind of specifying like the behavior of it with examples, or getting it to help you create examples of it, and then turning those into stuff. I'm not sure if that's something familiar with.
Yeah, I don't have a firm grasp on the distinction between TDD and BDD, but I feel like that's kind of what we were doing with the factoring scenario where we're giving it, when I give you 8, you should give me back 1 and 8 and 2 and 4, providing those examples. But obviously, that's kind of a very low level piece of behavior. I have done some like higher level stuff where I say, here's my high level like business requirement. Now help me break this down into use cases and ultimately into test cases. And I found it to be pretty good at that.
Okay, cool. Let's see, jump to Slido. Okay, anyone else have any questions for Jason or thoughts? Okay, there's some interesting comments here. I'm going to save this and go back and look at it. Cool. Well, Jason, that was great. And if you get back with me when the book comes out, I can send an email out to the people that were here because those are probably people that'd be very interested in hearing when it came
Oh,
out.
thanks.
So thank you everybody for coming. I will get you, let me see, the code with Jason. Let me throw a few links in here so everybody has them. I'll also follow up with an email here. So there is code with Jason link. Did that come through? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. And let me also mention, I mentioned that if you're looking for, if you want to get on my calendar to discuss anything related to Agile or anything else, there is a link. I've got some slots open the next few weeks. Love to talk to any of you. But yeah, well, Jason, thank you so much for doing this. This was very eye-opening for me. It's entertaining as well. I like I said, I've mostly used ChatGPT just to write crazy Batman scripts, but I'm starting to get to some ideas. I need to try some other stuff. It may be just as entertaining. Um, so cool. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me.
Let's see. Somebody's sharing some. Okay, somebody accidentally shared something. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Jason. Send me any links you want people to have. I'll send them out on an email, and then we can follow up later when your book comes out and send it out to this group of people. Hope to see everybody next week. We're going to be talking about having retrospectives and getting a lot of value from that. So hope to see you then. And yeah, great. Everybody have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you. Bye, guys.